Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth. And just when you think the Jeffrey Epstein case was an isolated situation, it is not. I'm going to give you a story about a timeline of abuse and neglect, of negligence. This is about sexual abuse and negligence at a Christian summer camp in southwest Missouri called Kanakuk Kamps. Kanakuk Kamps. Kanakuk Kamps. And the things that went on or have been alleged at this camp in southwest Missouri is going to shock you that this is happening or has allegedly happened right up under our nose. So, Kanakuk Kamps, a well-documented case of abuse at a Christian summer camp in southwest Missouri, and a history of sexual abuse by the camp director, Pete Newman, and other staffers. For example, Pete Newman allegedly was swimming and playing basketball with children while nude. Pete Newman's supervisor recommended that he be fired in 2003 after receiving those reports, but CEO Joe White did not act on that recommendation. Instead of being removed, Pete Newman was actually promoted in 2005. The core legal argument across nearly all suits has been that for decades, CEO Joe White and other Kanakuk leaders knew about and facilitated activities and behaviors that classify as sexual abuse, and that repeated failures to comply with mandatory reporting laws allowed the abuse to continue. So let's get into this timeline of abuse, negligence, lawsuits, and how it went down. So in 1995, relying on an incomplete application without references and no background check, Pete Newman is hired as the Kanakuk Kamps counselor at age 19. Soon after, he begins a 14-year history of sexual crimes with male campers. In 1987, former Kanakuk Kamps staff member Kobe Dale Grimes is fired for sexual misconduct with campers, but is not reported to law enforcement. As a result, Grimes goes on to work in youth ministry and is caught abusing children as a youth pastor at another institution and ultimately convicted in 2002. In 1997, actor and comedian Bill Cosby publicly endorsed Kanakuk's kids across America for urban youth, stating kids across America is doing what needs to be done with kids, and you need to be a part of this place too. This is from Bill Cosby. We know he went from the highest mark in the land down to the very bottom towards the end of his stage in life. He was America's dad and then became America's nightmare. So in 2000, Joe White, the CEO, his private pilot, Robert John Morgan, who flies him to speaking engagements and medical appointments, is indicted on charges of sodomizing a female victim under the age of 14. This is his pilot. While Morgan awaits trial, Joe White invites him to live on the Kanakuk property. White testifies to a judge prior to sentencing that he would have no problem allowing the man to babysit his own children, and encourages the judge not to imprison Robert John Morgan, his pilot. Morgan is convicted and sentenced to 10 years in prison for statutory sodomy. From 1999 to 2008, Pete Newman continues grooming and abusing campers. The abuse includes encouragement of and participation in nude swimming, basketball, and four-wheeling, exposure and inspection of genitalia, one-on-one sleepovers, mutual masturbation sessions, oral sex, and sodomy, all occurring while he is representing Kanakuk and promoted within the ranks. Parents and campers regularly report to Joe White and other camp leaders about incidences of Newman's nudity with campers. Kanakuk leadership reacts in various ways, including visiting families to get more information and disallowing some reporting parents' children to return to camp. Despite policies forbidding any degree of sexual contact between staff members and campers, any evidence of homosexual behavior, laying on a camper's bed day or night, or nude games, Kanakuk Kamps does not terminate Newman or report him to law enforcement, but instead takes the following actions. They warn Newman that his one-on-one sleepovers with boys could destroy Joe White's ministry counsels, could destroy Joe White's ministry. He counsels Newman about kid time and advises him to show restraint. He has Newman sign a probationary agreement acknowledging his sexual improprieties with young boys, but continues to allow him to interact with children. He sends Newman for a psychological evaluation, but cancels his evaluation and any further counseling sessions once the psychologist indicates Newman's behavior is potentially reportable. CEO White sends Newman to meet with an attorney for training on the legal implications of sexual misconduct, conversations protected under attorney-client privilege. While White also instructs Newman's supervisor to stress to Newman how important it is that he spends the next 6 months with Newman's wife and less time with children. During this time, Pete Newman is promoted to director of K Country. He is prominently featured on the Kanakuk Kamps website and in camp videos and written materials. He represents Kanakuk Kamps on recruitment trips and leads father-son retreats. CEO White purchases Newman a lot for his home near Kanakuk Kamps, which includes a fireman's pole and a hot tub. Pete Newman is encouraged to host additional paracamp ministries, often one-on-one or in small groups, including his hot tub Bible studies, a practice he talks about in Kanakuk speeches and often uses as a location for abuse. So in 2009, threatened with outside legal action, Pete Newman writes a confession letter. Kanakuk leadership then confronts Newman, who initially reveals about 15 names of boys he had abused. They confiscate his laptop, terminate his employment, and send him home. Signed statements by 3 Kanakuk leaders involved make no mention of promptly contacting law enforcement or legal authorities. In a signed statement, CEO White admits he knew of Newman's naked hot tub sessions, mutual masturbation, and nude running through the camp with minors, but again made no mention of having contacted law enforcement or legal authorities about these incidences. Kanakuk leaders contact some victim families and tell them they learned about Pete Newman's abuse because of a tip from a hotline. Joe White, the CEO, begins an apology tour, flying privately to visit victims' families in person and showering them with gifts including free camp tuition, hunting trips, iPads, Disney World vacations, and fruit baskets. Following Newman's termination and confession of child sexual abuse, CEO Joe White sends an email to Kanakuk families that stated Newman is dealing with a personal family crisis while asking them to respect his privacy and keep Newman in your prayers. So in 2010, Pete Newman receives 2 life sentences plus 30 years in Missouri State Prison based on multiple counts of statutory sodomy and child enticement involving child abuse on Kanakuk property. And why in the world, in the hell, are they not indicting the CEO, Joe White? That is part of the question in this story. So, Kanakuk Kamps released in 2011, Kanakuk Kamps released its first written policy on preventing essay abuse. 19 years after materials to educate staff were readily available, and more than 23 years after the Camp Director's Guide, Preventing Sexual Exploitation of Children, was published by the U.S. Department of Justice. Here's another person, Ed Ringheim, a former K-1 counselor and volunteer for K-Life Orlando, is charged with 8 felony counts of essay assault and sentenced to 15 years in Florida State Prison. A Missouri judge issues a restraining order against Kanakuk Kamps president Joe White to stop him from contacting a essay abuse victim with unwanted letters, phone calls, emails, and care packages. The first civil lawsuits against Kanakuk and former Kanakuk Kamps director Pete Newman, alleging essay abuse, are filed on behalf of a Jane Doe and John Doe in Texas federal court. And then in 2012, former Kanakuk Kamps counselor Lee Bradbury pleads guilty to 2 Class B felonies of first-degree child molestation, a Class D felony of sexual misconduct involving a child under 15, and an unclassified felony of first-degree attempted statutory sodomy with a person under 14 years old. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Paul Kerr, former Kanakuk counselor hired in 1998, pleads guilty to felony essay assault of a child, as well as 2 other misdemeanor charges in Colorado State Court. CEO Joe White of Kanakuk Kamps testifies that he had thought Newman's nudity with children, such as naked basketball, was improper, immature, and inappropriate. He states that he never considered that Pete may be dangerous around kids. How crazy does that sound? So a claim of child essay abuse in 2013, originally filed in federal court in Texas and back in 2011 against Kanakuk Kamps on behalf of a John Doe and a Jane Doe, is settled and all related documents are sealed. A lawsuit filed in Missouri State Court by a John Doe and his parents alleging essay abuse by Kanakuk Kamps. A claim against Kanakuk Kamps for essay abuse is filed in Texas court by a John Doe 3. In 2015, at a Liberty University convocation, Kanakuk's CEO Joe White emotionally details an interaction with a R victim in which he says his conversation with her allowed her to regain her purity and virginity. In the same speech, he also describes a man who had been incestuously abused by his father and encourages listeners to forgive their abusers to be freed from resentment. In 2018, a $20 million judgment is awarded to Jane Doe case number 9, making it the top plaintiff's judgment in Missouri for that year. In 2019, a Texas family notes in the obituary of a former camper that he was a survivor of Kanakuk Kamps abuse. Joe White, the CEO of Kanakuk Kamps, receives the Missourian Award, a prestigious award acknowledging the most accomplished citizen of Missouri. He received this award in 2019. In 2022, a series of articles published in USA Today and the Springfield News Leader exposing decades of alleged abuse and cover-ups. Paul Green, Kobe Dale Grimes, Ed Ringheim, and Chuck Price are publicly named as predators affiliated with Kanakuk Kamps. In 2024, former Kanakuk staffer Mark Harmon is arrested and charged with child sex crimes in Texas. In conclusion, Kanakuk abuse survivors testify in front of the Missouri House Judiciary Committee to advocate for civil statutes of limitations, SOL reform, on behalf of these victims. What a crazy story.